and welcome to the OneOp webinar, Ethics in Action, Applying Ethical Standards in Financial Counseling. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to share a little bit about OneOp. OneOp is a partnership between the Department of War and the Cooperative Extension System, and we support professionals like you so that you can better support military families. Our mission is to strengthen military family service providers by offering accessible, research-informed learning opportunities, and we do that by providing free online professional development through webinars like this one, along with podcasts, courses, and other resources designed to fit your busy schedule. We're glad you're here and part of this learning community today, and we thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Department of War and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of the professionals supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Department of War, U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. government, or OneOp. The mention of any entity or product is for informational purposes only. In case you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give a brief tour of our webinar platform so that you can find your way around. Hopefully you are currently able to view the slides we're sharing. If you're unable to see them or have any other technical difficulties today, please email us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. As some of you are doing right now, we look forward to having you join us in the chat pod for conversation and questions. Our presenters have a ton of case scenarios and questions to engage with you today and to invite you to share with the group based on your experiences. You will want to go ahead and embed the chat pod so that you don't miss any links or conversation. To embed the chat pod, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You'll then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, click on the chat bubble icon. When typing questions or comments, please be sure to select everyone from the response options drop-down menu so that everyone is able to view your questions and your comments in the chat pod. We have a full 2-hour session today, so we'll be tracking the questions that come into the chat pod, and we'll hopefully have time for Q&A with our presenters at the end of today's session. Our principal investigator, Dr. Nicole Huff, Assistant Extension Professor for Family Finance and Resource Management at the University of Kentucky, will be moderating today's Q&A. This session is approved for 2 ethics CEUs for accredited financial counselors and certified personal finance counselors. We will be covering continuing education information at the end of today's session, so please stay tuned at the end for information about how to obtain CE credits. And lastly, note that the slides and resources are available for download on the event page. If you need to step away at any time, the webinar recording will be available on the event page within 48 hours. And lastly, you can turn on the subtitles via the Zoom toolbar. It is my privilege to introduce our guest speakers today. Dr. Bruce Ross is an accredited financial counselor and a certified financial therapist and serves as an associate professor in the Family Sciences Department for the Martin Gatton College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment at the University of Kentucky. He is also the program director for the Family Financial Counseling undergraduate major program and the program director for the Family Financial Therapy graduate certificate program. Dr. Ross serves on the board for the Financial Therapy Association and the editorial board of the Journal of Financial Therapy and the Journal of Personal Finance. He also co-hosts a podcast, Modern Husbands, which interviews experts each episode on improving your relationship with money, family, and well-being. Caleb Burrell has served as a licensed marriage and family therapist since 2018, and he specializes in trauma and couples work in his private practice, as well as mediates in Stanislaus, I hope I got that right, Caleb, County, California. He currently attends the University of Kentucky, where he is pursuing his doctoral degree in family science with an emphasis in family finance and economics. He holds a master's degree in counseling from Santa Clara University in California. And at this time, I will welcome our presenters to unmute and begin today's presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today with my co-host Caleb to discuss this month's webinar entitled Ethics in Action, Applying Ethical Standards in Financial Counseling. All right, so before we dive in today, let's review the learning objectives for today's session. By the end of this webinar, participants should be able to define key ethical principles outlined in the Military Standards of Ethical Conduct and the AFCPE Code of Ethics, differentiate between ethical requirements related to financial disclosures, conflicts of interest, and federal gifting guidelines, analyze ethical dilemmas through case studies within military contexts. I'm very excited about doing that with you all. And apply ethical decision-making frameworks to enhance your work. So we would like to get a sense of who is in the audience today. If you can see the pop-up poll or have an other choice, please join us in the chat pod with your answers. We want to know what types of services you primarily work in. There should be a poll that pops up as well on the screen that you can, there it is, that you can also put your answer into. Caleb, are you there?
Caleb, it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Oh,
all right. I don't know if the poll did something interesting to my microphone there, but we hope to learn by learning a little bit more about your background that it will give us and others in the audience a chance to understand the diversity of services in the audience today and the perspectives that you bring.
and so it does look like in this poll today, we have about half or a little bit over half in the financial education area for your primary work, with 17% or so in financial services. And then we have kind of some difference in the others. But we're so excited to have you all here. Another quick poll that we have today, if it loads, is we want to know who you primarily work with. Again, if you can't see that poll pop up or have another choice, please join us in the chat pod with your answers. But it should pop up. There it is right now.
It's a good idea to familiarize yourself with the chat, as we'll ask for your feedback from time to time throughout the webinar.
All right. And so even in the chat box right now, we're seeing a lot of all of the above, which is awesome that you work with so many different types of populations. But we do see, for those that answered in the chat, about 72% work with individuals primarily. I'm not saying you don't work with others, but primarily with individuals, though the chat, and then for the other, which was about 17%, is a lot of a mix or all. So thanks, that gives us kind of a good framework to see who we have in the audience here. So as we begin, and we really get further into it today, I want to start with a quick reflection. As we're going to discuss, the financial counselor's ethical and professional process always starts with you as the practitioner or educator and or advocate. So I'm going to ask you through this talk to think about your own experiences, potential and real biases, and your own professional processes. You may certainly, and are encouraged to do so, put your thoughts in the chat as we proceed, as we go through the slides today. But more importantly is really the honest reflection that you have with yourself. So we want to start with a few reflection questions. What does the term ethics mean to you? What words, phrases, emotions, values, and or images arise from that term?
What does the phrase professional conduct cultivate for you? What do you associate with it? What are the differences in those terms?
And how is your practice in alignment with your values, your beliefs, your behaviors?
How does your practice give space for others' values, beliefs, and behaviors?
And lastly, our last reflection question here for the start of it is, what ethical and professional challenges present themselves through the course of your own work? We're hopefully going to be able to dig down into some of those things today. I see a lot in the chat box that I absolutely love right now, especially with integrity and honesty and trust. Love to see all of that. So getting into it, on the most basic level, we have the Merriam-Webster definition of ethics as the discipline dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation. That's a pretty broad, generic definition, right? In professional settings, ethics often defined as personal and organizational standards of behavior expected by those professionals in the discipline. And specifically with the AFCPE Code of Ethics, they defined ethics or professional ethics as a commitment to honesty, integrity, and confidentiality. Those same words that we saw often in the chat today. Ensuring that certified professionals provide competent, diligent, and objective services in their clients' best interests. So generally, each profession will have their own ethical codes and expectations along with those codes in accordance to the specific scope of practice that they are working within. But as you can see, all are still general in their definitions. And those codes of ethics, those standards of practice, are intentionally written in broad principle language because they must apply across a wide range of situations, settings, and evolving professional contexts. So as financial counselors or educators or advocates, we're working with diverse clients, complex personal circumstances, changing laws, and emerging technologies, right? So overly rigid rules run the risk of quickly becoming outdated or fail to address really the nuanced ethical dilemmas that are presenting themselves. By remaining somewhat general, ethical codes emphasize core principles that we've discussed and that you have included in the chat, such as integrity and competence and client welfare. rather than prescribing responses to every single possible scenario out there. This flexibility really does encourage professionals then to exercise judgment, critical thinking, their own ethical reasoning, and really allowing the standards then to guide behavior for both common and unforeseen situations while preserving their relevance over time. So I'm going to suggest something if you haven't done so already, but that is really to develop your own personal code of ethics, in addition to the set ones of our accreditations or our disciplining body. So Ronald A. Howard and Clinton D. Covert, they wrote a book entitled Creating a Personal Code to Guide Decisions in Work and Life. This argued that our sense of ethics must come first from a personally developed code that we must, as practitioners or educators, develop each on our own. The premise in this book is that in this argument, is that we encounter small ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. Even things such as, I was 5 minutes late to work, but no one else is here yet, so I'll just mark my time card as on time. Something minor, somewhat inconsequential. The authors in this book are not intended to give right or wrong answers, but they encourage personal contemplation and reflection to really abide by not only your institutions or your accrediting body's ethical codes, but your own code as well. There's always extreme cases of ethical conduct, like don't cheat your clients out of money. Don't sleep with your clients. Don't break confidentiality, right? The answers to those are often pretty black and white. But what I'm getting at is those areas in between. Those areas that technically may not break the AFCPE Code of Ethics. They may not technically break a military code of ethics. But they may somewhat go against the spirit of the standard or code. Or even go against your own personal code. So for instance, we see everyday financial practitioners that are not actively cheating their clients out of money, but may make referrals that are advantageous to them directly or even indirectly. We see financial practitioners that may not directly sleep with active clients, but where that line of attraction, where is it? Where it becomes then a conflict of interest. Where we see financial practitioners not directly breaking client confidentiality, but they're venting at the bar or at a conference or a symposium or in an online chat or at a restaurant to other colleagues, other professionals about the client, but maybe they give too many details away accidentally. So having a personal code allows us to have better sound judgment and make decisions that are going to be consistent with our own principles as well as our own professional code of ethics and standard of practice. So as we consider then our own personal code of ethical practice, we can look to actually Karen Kitchener. She's a prominent psychologist in the 1980s, but who did foundational work on ethical decision-making within any type of counseling relationship. And she had or coined 5 areas or 5 pillars of ethics. First being autonomy, which addresses one's right to self-determination. This right's also accorded to others. So practitioners should encourage clients to direct their own beliefs and personal courses of action. The second pillar is non-malfeasance, or to do no harm to others, wherein practitioners shun behaviors that intentionally may hurt clients. And in this, practitioners also avoid any behaviors that risk inflicting harm on others. The third pillar of beneficence considers one's quality of charitableness. So under this principle, practitioners are obligated to contribute to the well-being of our clients through good and helpful services. And fourth, we have justice, which speaks to the concept of fairness. where practitioners should treat clients in an appropriate manner, all the while weighing ideas of equal versus fair versus equitable versus simply different or personalized for the advice within the counseling process. And lastly, our fifth guiding pillar for our own code of ethics is fidelity, or our commitment and loyalty to others. So practitioners should respect their counseling discipline's obligations and fulfill these obligations in a trustworthy manner to the clients, colleagues, peers, and the community really at large. So these 5 pillars of ethical decision-making really help develop and guide us in our development for creating our own personal code of ethics on top of what our discipline and our industry or institution already requires. So when we look to the military and armed forces as financial counselors, educators, practitioners, we would be remiss if we didn't really tie things back to the financial readiness mission, right? So the financial readiness is a critical component of mission readiness and is defined by the Department of War as a state in which successful management of personal financial responsibilities support a service member's ability to perform their duties.
So take a moment to reflect on your duty and responsibility. How do you support the Department of War's mission? And more specifically, how does your personal ethic or integrity help those you serve, and subsequently their service?
Going through all this, and as we really dive into it, I want to give a quick point of clarification here. We've been talking about codes of ethics and standards of practice, and they're often used interchangeably and synonymously with each other. However, they are actually distinct. Ethical codes often describe an association's or organization's core ethical values, principles, ideas, and beliefs as a whole. While professional standards of conduct, in turn, are the specific professional activities and or behaviors that can or cannot be carried out under the designation of the said association or organization. So there is a distinct difference, even though often they are lumped together or used interchangeably. And I know this is nothing new to those that already have their accredited financial counselors designation or are studying for it right now. And they've assigned to adhere to these codes as part of your designation, right? But we'd be also remiss in any type of ethics presentation if we didn't outline the AFCPE's codes of ethics. And as well as the 12 core principles that really guide the professional conduct that we have to follow as financial counselors. So these principles reinforce the responsibilities counselors have for their clients and to their clients, as well as the profession and the public as a whole, by really emphasizing, again, those points of integrity, objectivity, competence, fairness, confidentiality, and professionalism. And so here on the screen, there's the first 6 of the 12 principles that encompass those qualities. And here, of course, then are the second set and last 6 codes of ethics principles. And we're going to get into talking about these later on today as we go through the case studies. But together, they all provide really a framework of ethical decision-making and help ensure that as financial counselors or practitioners or educators, we deliver trustworthy, client-centered guidance, all while maintaining our highest standard of practice in the field. And of course, the AFCPE standards of practice then provide the more detailed guidance of how counselors translate ethical principles into day-to-day professional actions. So while the Code of Ethics, again, establishes the values that guide the profession, the standards of practice outline the specific behaviors and processes that are then in turn going to support the ethical, competent, and client-focused financial counseling or education processes. So AFCPE has 51 standards of practice, and they're organized into 8 different sections that follow pretty much a natural progression of a counseling relationship. These sections address topics such as establishing the client relationship, gathering our information, analyzing a client's financial situation, developing recommendations, implementing strategies, evaluating outcomes. Additional standards focus then on the documentation process, professional responsibilities, and maintaining the appropriate boundaries in the counseling relationship. Together, all these standards really create a practical framework that's going to help us as counselors or practitioners, educators, deliver consistent, high-quality services. And of course, by following these guidelines, we can ensure the work reflects both ethical principles of the profession and the best practices that support effective financial counseling processes.
We would also be remiss if we didn't review the key ethical principles outlined in the Military Ethics and Standard of Conduct as well. This issuance is divided into 2 sections of general issuance information and responsibilities in order to establish policy and assign responsibilities for the Department of War Ethics Program in accordance with the Ethics in Government Act. The purpose is to ensure consistent standards of conduct across all Department of War components and roles. The Military Ethics and Standard of Conduct define the roles of key entities, such as the General Counsel of the Department of War as the principal ethics official responsible for oversight, policy, and maintaining the Joint Ethics Regulation, which serves as the uniform source of ethics guidance. The policy requires all DOW personnel to uphold the highest ethical standards, seek guidance when needed, and avoid conflicts of interest, with violations potentially resulting in administrative, civil, or criminal consequences. It also outlines coordination requirements among DOW agencies, assigns system management responsibilities for financial disclosure, and post-employment tracking, and directs DOW component heads to implement and maintain effective ethics programs within their organization. Within the framework established by the AFCPE's Code of Ethics and the 51 standards of practice, the Department of War expectations for financial counselors further clarify how ethical responsibilities are carried out when serving military communities. These instructions emphasize equitable access, professional competence, and appropriate referral practices, all of which reinforce the ethical foundation of financial counseling. Again, I realize these instructions are probably second nature to most of you, but it never hurts to review and highlight some of the important ones. That's why it is baked into our continuing education standards. First, DOW guidance states that financial counseling must be provided upon request to military family members and other individuals entitled to service under law, regulation, or DOW policy. This requirement reflects the ethical principles of fairness and professionalism in ensuring that eligible service members, their families, and qualified members of the community have access to financial education and counseling without unnecessary barriers. For counselors, this means maintaining a client-centered approach and being prepared to serve a diverse population that may face unique financial pressures associated with military life. The DOW also emphasizes counselor competence in understanding consumer protections that specifically apply to military populations, Counselors are expected to be familiar with laws such as the Military Lending Act and Service Member Civil Relief Act, as well as other consumer protections like credit monitoring resources and relevant state or local regulations. Staying informed about these protections aligns with the ethical expectations for professional competence and diligence, enabling counselors to provide accurate information and help clients recognize potential financial risks or violations. Finally, ethical practice includes recognizing the limits of a counselor's role and making appropriate referrals when necessary. When a potential violation of consumer rights is identified, counselors are directed to refer clients to installation legal assistance offices or the appropriate regulatory agency. This practice supports the ethical standard of integrity and client advocacy by ensuring individuals receive specialized legal guidance when needed, while allowing financial counselors to remain within the scope of their professional expertise. I have the opportunity to serve as a child custody recommending counselor, or known as a mediator, for child custody disputes that come into my office in California. As an example of what I might experience, let's say that a couple broke up during the summer, and the children are now living 1 week with mom and 1 week with dad. On the one hand, you have a father who is requesting primary custody. He states that he wants the child to live with him during the week, to live in the house that the children have lived in the last 5 years. He wants them to continue to have the same friends and schools that they've had in the last school year. And it is important for him to keep things as consistent as possible. He believes that the mother is highly anxious and overbearing on the children. On the other hand, you have a mother who had to move to a different city. She shares that before her separation, that she primarily took care of the children, as she was a stay-at-home parent and made sure to attend all school, doctor, and other child care appointments at school. She shares with you that she had to move to the other city with the family because it was the only affordable place she could live, and states that the father hasn't paid child support that she is owed. She also shares that she has plenty of family to look after the children for when she does get a job, while the father only has his new girlfriend to help pick the children up from school. What do you imagine you might do if this was the case? What if you found out that one parent had a long past drug or criminal history? What if both parents do? I have ethical guidelines to help direct the recommendation that I give to the courts. First and foremost, I believe it states that what is in the best interest of the children. But likewise, there are things I cannot consider, such as matters of child support. I do have to consider the children's age, relationship to each parent, mental health considerations, and a host of other factors, such as the parent's mental health, criminal history, drug use, and history of domestic violence. But as I reiterated before, when I try to do what is best for the children, and it's usually never perfect, I find that making ethical decisions become a little bit easier. Ultimately, financial counselors must hold themselves accountable for maintaining the highest standards of practice on behalf of the clients they serve. Ethical codes and standards of professional conduct provide a roadmap for navigating complex professional situations and making decisions that prioritize the well-being of clients. In a field where individuals often seek help during times of financial stress or uncertainty, these frameworks help ensure that counselors approach their work with integrity and competence. For instance, we must remember that any relationship with counselors, educators, mentors, or or guides the financial counseling relationship is also going to be naturally unbalanced. Clients often come to counselors when they feel vulnerable, overwhelmed, or unsure about their financial decisions. At the same time, financial situations are rarely simple, even more so within many military contexts. Client issues are often layered and complicated, involving personal behaviors, legal considerations, and long-term consequences. Ethical guidelines provide a framework to help practitioners distinguish right from wrong, make sound professional judgments, and approach challenging situations with clarity and responsibility. Ethical standards also create consistency across the profession. They establish clear expectation for practitioners' behavior and reinforce a shared commitment to professionalism. This consistency strengthens trust with the community among the individuals we serve. Just as organizations like the AFCPE emphasize in their public messaging about the importance of trustworthy financial professionals, ethical standards help ensure that clients can have confidence in those providing financial guidance. I'm actually reminded of those CFP board commercials from a few years ago where they dress a punk rocker in a suit to give financial advice to clients, with the point being, know who to trust. We are trusted as professionals and as a community because of the adherence to a unified set of principles. It is also important to remember that ethical frameworks exist not because professionals are perfect, but because they are human. Ethical guidelines provide guardrails to help practitioners navigate difficult situations, reflect on their decisions, and remain accountable to both clients and their professional. Rather than viewing ethics as a system of punishment, it is more helpful to view it as a tool for protection. Ethics standards protect clients from harm, protect professionals by providing clear expectations, and protect the credibility of the profession as a whole. This responsibility is particularly important when working with military populations. Financial vulnerability can be significant among junior service members. For example, surveys indicate that 31% of service members in pay grades E1 through E4 report some level of difficulty managing their finances, while approximately 20% report feeling uncomfortable with their financial knowledge. These realities reinforce the importance of ethical and client-centered financial counseling that supports service members and their families in building long-term financial stability. Although codes of ethics are designed to guide professional behavior and protect both clients and practitioners, they can fail to achieve their purpose when accountability mechanisms are weak. If the consequences or ramifications for unethical behavior are unclear or too minimal, the code may lose its effectiveness as a meaningful standard for professional conduct. Clear expectations and appropriate enforcement help reinforce the seriousness of ethical responsibilities. Codes of ethics may also fall short when there is a lack of buy-in from within either an organization or profession. If practitioners do not feel a sense of ownership or commitment to the ethical standard, the code can become a document that exists in theory rather than a guide that shapes ongoing daily practices. Regular review and updates are also essential. When codes are not revised to reflect current professional practices, evolving policies, or emerging challenges, they may no longer provide relevant guidance. Finally, ethical practice can be undermined when professionals lack sufficient resources or support. Limited access to training, guidance, or institutional resources can make it difficult for practitioners to fully uphold ethical expectations. Additionally, individuals who are overstressed or experiencing significant imbalance in their personal or professional lives may struggle to consistently apply ethical principles. Recognizing these is essential to our professional development and maintaining strong ethical practices because it helps professionals move beyond simply relying on written rules and towards actively practicing ethical decision making. Ethical codes are important framework, but they cannot anticipate every situation a practitioner may encounter. And we can be better prepared to recognize ethical risks and challenges as they arise. Failures in ethical practice can have significant professional consequences for financial counselors, but also those we serve and the discipline as a whole. Trust is foundational to the counseling relationship. And unethical behavior can quickly damage both individual and organizational credibility. When trust is compromised, professionals may experience reputational harm, loss of professional opportunities, and potentially disciplinary action that could place certifications or credentials at risk. Unethical practice can also have serious impacts on clients. Individuals often seek financial counseling during vulnerable periods in their lives, and poor ethical decisions can result in financial harm, misinformation, or lost opportunities to improve their financial stability. In addition to financial consequences, clients may experience emotional distress, which may result in not seeking professional guidance in the future, further harming them. There are also important personal consequences for practitioners themselves. Acting in ways that conflict with one's professional values can lead to strong emotional stressors such as guilt, shame, or internal conflict about our own morality. Over time, repeated ethical strain or unresolved ethical challenges may contribute to professional dissatisfaction and burnout. Again, and there is a reason we are repeatedly emphasizing this, maintaining strong ethical practices not only protects clients, but also supports the long-term well-being and integrity of the practitioners, you, and the practice.
And so as we're talking about ethics, like we also want to address how ethical practices in military settings often can look a little different from traditional civilian counseling environments, simply due to the nature of military life and structure, right? Financial counselors working with service members and their families operate within a structured system shaped by hierarchy, operational demands, unique community dynamics. These factors can introduce additional ethical stressors that require counselors to carefully balance professional standards with really the realities of the military environment. I think one key consideration is the presence of rank and power dynamics. The military chain of command can influence communication, expectations, decision-making processes, and in some situations, counselors may face requests from leadership for information about a service member's financial situation. That was even just in the chat from Kim of the number one question I get asked is, will my leadership find out? And so navigating these requests require careful attention to confidentiality standards, professional boundaries, applicable policy, all while maintaining the trust with those that we're working with. So military communities also tend to be tightly connected, right? You know this. And so that can increase the likelihood of dual relationships. So for instance, financial counselors may interact with the same individuals in multiple roles, such as through family readiness groups or programs on the installation sites or even out at community events. Additionally, counselors working on the installation may have different responsibilities and different visibilities compared to those working off the installation. And so these overlapping roles can create situations where maintaining the professional boundaries requires thoughtful awareness and clear communication. Lastly, but perhaps most importantly, the military lifestyle itself introduces unique stressors. And those are going to affect both clients and counselors. The frequent relocations, high operational tempo, the deployment cycles, and all the potential financial, relational, psychological stressors that come with those can really create financial instability as well as emotional strain for service members and their families. And so these conditions require counselors then to remain adaptable while also maintaining their consistent ethical standards.
All right, and we want to explore a series of ethical practice scenarios designed to encourage thoughtful discussion and active participation. As each scenario is presented, you will be invited to share your thoughts in the chat box by considering several key questions. Which code of ethics or professional standards applies in this situation? What would you do if you were faced with this decision? What potential risks or unintended consequences could arise? And finally, how would you document and defend your decision if it were questioned later? These scenarios are intended to help us reflect on how ethical principles guide real-world practice and how thoughtful decision-making supports both professional integrity and the client's well-being.
So first, we want to start with actually the most human of traits, the fact that we're never perfect. We make mistakes. I make mistakes. Caleb makes mistakes. You make mistakes. We remember and say the wrong thing. And so where do our ethical codes and standards of practice guide us when we discuss, say, or do something wrong or gave bad advice as a financial practitioner or educator or advocate? What are your thoughts on that? So good. You state honestly what went wrong and make sure you have a plan in place. That's great. Be honest, inform the client, and then correct it. Just the simple from Wanda, I was wrong, is a good place to start. I wholeheartedly agree with that. So when
I
an
love
AFC,
just being on, yeah. I just
go
love
ahead.
apologizing. It's great. Yeah.
So when an AFC or financial educator, counselor, they realize they gave an incorrect or suboptimal advice, the ethical response includes these elements. We must address the issue as soon as it's discovered, as delaying disclosure can increase harm and undermine the trust. So take responsibility without any defensiveness or blame, and avoid minimizing the impact of what went wrong. Then we need to explain what was incorrect, why it was incorrect, and how the error occurred in very plain language. And then present a clear plan to remedy the situation and mitigate any negative impact. So the focus really should be on prioritizing the client's financial well-being, including exploring a plan to get them back on track, especially if there's any short or long-term financial costs associated. And as always, we need to do our due diligence in documenting that conversation and the corrective steps that we took in accordance with our professional standards. An example discussion may look something like, I want to revisit the recommendation I made regarding your retirement investment planning. After reviewing the information again, I realized that my guidance did not fully account for your liquidity needs. That was my oversight. I take responsibility for it, and I want to explain what happened and outline how we can correct it. Here's what I recommend moving forward, and here's how this change helps align better with your goals. If this adjustment caused any inconvenience or cost, I'd like to discuss how we can address that and work out a plan to get you back on track. Your trust is important to me, and I appreciate the opportunity then to correct this. So simple messages like that emphasize transparent communication. And it's going to include clarifying when our prior guidance is incomplete or incorrect. And I just want to acknowledge, I think the chat hit the nail on the head with their key advice and ways to approach those situations.
I completely agree, Bruce. It's great to see that. So one area that potentially adds risk to your clients is the usage of artificial intelligence. AI can be an incredibly useful tool where it can be beneficial to help generate documents, make notes, and helping to find resources for your work. However, where AI fails is when you over rely on it, defaulting to its expertise rather than building your own. A term I want to introduce to you is automation bias, which means an over-reliance on technology supports that results in errors, even when contradictory information is present. This term was originally coined in the 90s in response to pilots relying on automated systems over their own expertise. Now it is being applied to generative AI, where expertise where there's a tendency to trust what is being generated instead of using your training and experience. There's a temptation to wholly rely on a system-generated answer without checking and verifying the facts that are being provided, which may be detrimental to your client. AI is based on a vast amount of information. However, when it is generated, it can become biased or based on data that is being provided and also the programming. One example of an unintended consequence of AI was reported on by Reuters a few years ago in an article. A large online commercial retailer had created an AI model to help their managers sift through applications and suggest the top candidates for potential positions. However, the data the model was based upon was primarily male applicants. This had the unintended consequences of ranking male applicants as more suitable for the positions over their equally qualified female applicants. Though unintentional, had this error not been caught, it could have been damaging to the business. Finally, as you've probably learned, AI will at times hallucinate information, make up something or provide a source which seems plausible, but ultimately fake. It becomes important that you critically evaluate your usage of AI in your practice, both as a matter of ethics and standard of practice. However, you might consider how it might be able to help streamline your services while also balancing how it is used ethically. How will you be transparent with your clients if you do use it? I'd like you to consider the questions on this slide in the following two scenarios. So first scenario, Jonathan has been under significant pressure with his responsibilities, both personal and as a financial counselor, which I'm sure you all can relate to. His new client, Elaine, is a cyber analyst and wants to make an investment plan and budget. Jonathan, as a time-saving device, uploaded an existing investment plan he had used for a previous client in Gen AI as a template for Elaine. When meeting with Elaine, she notices a few inconsistencies and errors in the plan. Jonathan eagerly mentions to Elaine that he has been busy and that the plan was just a draft, and the errors were the fault of Gen AI. Alarmed, Elaine ends the meeting and asks to speak to Jonathan's direct supervisor. Now let's consider some of these questions. What risks, if any, resulted in Jonathan's use of AI or Gen AI? What potential risks did his actions place on the client? What steps might Jonathan have taken to mitigate those risks?
And again, a lot of great responses in the in the chat already, especially, yes, with the loss of trust. Issues with confidentiality, especially with using Gen AI programming. And so there could be a potential data breach even.
I like that there's a lot of comment on double checking too. If you're going to have something, make sure that it's real, that you're not seeing those hallucinations, and checking that work before it's presented.
Yeah. So in this scenario, I'm actually reminded of a pretty recent article in Yahoo Finance, in which they had ChatGPT. They asked it to generate a retirement plan designed to support $100,000 in annual income during retirement. The Yahoo Finance invited a certified financial planner from a prominent wealth management firm to evaluate that plan. And at first glance, the advisor noted that the proposal actually passed what he described as a quote unquote sniff test. It was not obviously flawed. It appeared broadly, but it appeared reasonable. However, he also described a sense of what's often called the uncanny valley effect. This is a phenomenon in which something appears correct or realistic on the surface, yet especially to an expert or someone with lived experience, feels subtly off. And so actually upon closer examination, the financial planner found that the plan was not technically incorrect, but it was incomplete. It failed to address critical variables such as the changes in the family circumstances, lifestyle adjustments, relocation, and even the inclusion of inflation. The math worked in a very generalized sense. But for the vast majority of individuals and the people that we see, the assumptions would not hold true. And so the analysis lacked nuance, and lacked context, it lacked personalization. And so we need to be careful. AI platforms can be a great tool, but the information may appear credible and polished at first glance, but it often lacks really the depth and the specificity that's required for sound financial plans and sound decision making.
Absolutely, Bruce. And I just want to add too, and I'm also seeing this also in the chat from a few individuals mentioning this, but that the information that you upload to any kind of generative AI server and similar public AI systems is not secure, meaning that whatever information that we are entering in is being stored and can be reviewed by a human and is potentially used in the future development of the model. In a practical sense, this means that if you were to upload your client's information to be analyzed, it is no longer confidential. There have been numerous concerns that have been raised about uploading confidential information to some of those public generative AI platforms.
And so I do want to also point out from the chat too, from Jenny Smith is absolutely correct that, and I think you're going to like actually the next scenario that we present, but you're correct in that investment advice, and specific investment advice does fall outside the scope of an AFC. But we still need to be aware of what other referrals or what other practitioners that are working with our clients, what they are recommending.
All right, so moving on to vignette number 2. All right, so please pay attention to this as for fee transparency. Jordan, an accredited financial counselor working on a U.S. military installation, meets with Staff Sergeant Ramirez, who is preparing for deployment and wants help consolidating debt and starting a college saving plan for his children. During the session, Jordan recommends a specific investment platform and insurance product, explaining that they are well suited for military families. What Jordan does not clearly disclose is that he receives referral compensation from the investment company and has a production-based bonus tied to the number of new accounts opened each quarter. Staff Sergeant Ramirez asks whether there are any fees he should know about, and Jordan briefly mentions standard administrative costs. Without explaining long-term expense ratios or his referral arrangement, Ramirez trusts Jordan because of the on-installation affiliation, assuming the recommendation is entirely objective. This vignette was generated by ChatGPT on February 2026. So I want you to consider a few questions. First, what ethical problems arise from Jordan as a financial counselor? How might Jordan, Ramirez discovers the bonus Jordan receives? And finally, how realistic is this AI-generated vignette? I'd add unaltered.
And so, yes, from the responses in the chat, there's a lot of problems, big problems with transparency, and conflicts of interest. I honestly, I laughed out loud at one of the comments or several of the comments, but like, nope, and definitely fired.
Absolutely. Oh, this is great. Some great comments in the chat there. So before we discuss the content of the vignette, I want to address the fact that the vignette was generated completely by AI. Part of what I considered ethical transparency is to make sure to cite the month and year and when this was generated, and who it was generated by. This also includes in my notes and who it was generated by. I also included in my notes the question that I asked the generative AI. This was done so you could easily understand the process in which the vignette was generated. It was also completed in this manner so that those in the future could understand where this narrative came from. It wasn't expertly crafted from experience. It was done by generative AI. Finally, I want you to experience what it was like to have that disclosure in this training setting. Did the vignette make sense to you? Was it something you could believe could happen?
And so let's talk about how realistic this was. Some of you put that, yeah, it's certainly plausible, even though it might be highly unethical. And so how does it relate to really the usage of AI programs? So first and foremost, the AI generated vignette is problematic because several elements of conflict with how the financial counseling on U.S. military installations is actually structured and regulated, right? Most of you immediately jumped on that. And in most cases, an accredited financial counselor working on the installation would be part of a government program, such as the Department of War Financial Readiness System, often delivered through Military One Source or installation personal financial management programs. But the counselors in these roles are required to provide education and guidance only. As a result, a counselor working in this role would generally be prohibited from endorsing a particular investment platform or insurance provider in that role. And so additionally, counselors providing official on-installation financial counseling are not permitted to then receive commissions, referral compensations, or production-based bonuses tied to the financial products. So these policies exist, as we've said in the chat, or as you all said in the chat, to prevent conflicts of interest and to really ensure that service members receive unbiased financial guidance. And so commercial financial companies must follow strict solicitation rules on military installations, and official counselors must maintain a clear separation between educational counseling and private sector financial product marketing. So because of these safeguards, the scenario described in the vignette would likely violate policy, would not normally occur within the military's financial counseling environment. What this does is it actually all highlights the fact that AI programs may not be providing the best advice. So artificial intelligence tools can be valuable for brainstorming ideas, summarizing information in our professional work. However, they have to be used with caution because AI systems may generate information or advice that is inaccurate, incomplete, or not appropriate for the specific population, issue, or context, especially one as regulated and complex as the military. So since AI models rely on broad data sets rather than any real-time policy or real-time guidance or even specialized situational knowledge, their outputs often overlook regulatory requirements or program-specific constraints. So for this reason, AI-generated content should always be carefully reviewed, verified with credible sources, and supplemented with professional judgment before being used in practice or presented as guidance. And I think, again, a lot of you have said that fully in the chat. So let's move on to another different ethical area, all right? That of dual relationships. So let's start off with this vignette. Janice is a successful financial counselor and also works part-time as a realtor outside of her military contract. Janice provides financial counseling to Connor, a recently stationed E4 and his family who moved to the local installation for a 3-year assignment. Connor and his wife, Anna, shared their strong desire to buy a home. Anna believes a home will give the children a sense of normalcy, and Connor believes it's going to be a great future investment. Janice helps them purchase a home in the local area under her realtor license. So what are the potential problems that are arising from Janice acting as a financial counselor and a realtor for this relationship? Yes, and Sharon also fired.
I'm seeing a lot of conflict of interest, a huge no by Angela.
Yes.
Yeah. Personal gain. Absolutely. So what immediately comes to mind for me is the likely conflict of interest that Janet has, just like everybody here is kind of sharing. She wants to be a financial counselor to help her client succeed financially, but by acting as a realtor in this case, her motivations to provide sound financial advice may be clouded by the potential of making a sale. She may be omitting good financial information to her clients and not being completely transparent about the risks the family faces with making this purchase. One way to increase objectivity is by making referrals. For instance, in this scenario, it would be better to refer the client to another realtor. By making an appropriate referral, you no longer have to check and recheck if your motivations are in line with what is best for the client, what is best for the client. Dual relationships can occur in many different ways. So it becomes important to consult with colleagues and legal advisors to help mitigate that risk. One exercise that I do is imagine myself in a courtroom and imagine having to defend my actions in cross-examination. In the case of Janet, I might ask, was there financial incentive for you to help the family purchase a home? Or is it possible for a financial counselor to omit details about the risk a client might face when purchasing a home? By taking such steps, you can better manage client risk and your own reputation. Can you imagine what setbacks Janet might have if the deal goes bad? If there is something she forgot about?
And so why this does seem like an obvious conflict of interest, for sure. This scenario outside of the military context and the military financial counselors is actually kind of a big topic and big button issue in the larger financial counseling and coaching communities. We have to be aware about the impact of dual relationships if we're going to maintain the integrity of our discipline. And so we also wanted to take the time at this point to discuss the financial disclosure requirements that you all have to abide by. So the Standards of Conduct Office manages the financial disclosure program for the Office of the Secretary of War to help identify and prevent conflicts of interest between official duties and personal financial interests. This program requires personnel to regularly report and review their financial holdings to ensure any potential or actual conflicts are addressed in a timely manner, with all disclosures completed electronically. Public financial disclosures apply to political appointees, general and flag officers, and senior civilian officials requiring annual reporting and periodic transaction reports. For certain securities transactions, all submitted through the integrity system, along with an annual certification on post-government employee restrictions. So confidential financial disclosures applies to less senior employees whose duties may affect outside financial interests and is filed through the financial disclosure management system. Supervisors can also play a key role by reviewing reports for conflicts, consulting ethical counsel when needed, and determining which employees must file confidential disclosures based on their duties. And as a couple of you actually noted in the chat as well, is something to add to the conversation about any dual relationships is referrals. And so to help prevent dual relationships in financial counseling, professionals must and should maintain an updated and well-vetted list of external referral resources. So having a current network of trusted providers allows counselors to direct clients to appropriate services without creating conflicts of interest or extending beyond their professional role. This practice supports ethical boundaries while ensuring clients still receive comprehensive support for needs outside the counselor's scope of practice. And if you truly want the best for those that you're referring, you must thoroughly evaluate every professional before adding them to your list, and then continue to reassess them over time. A one-time qualification is not a lifetime endorsement. So as your standards and experience grow, the individuals you recommend should continue to meet and reflect that growth. It's also beneficial to provide more than one option in each category. And as some of you have put, that means at least 3 in each category. So those you refer can select the professional who best aligns with their needs and preferences. Lastly, it's also important to note that this list also includes referrals in your same profession. It includes other AFCs. In case you have to refer due to a dual relationship or a workload issue or scope of practice issue, or really any other issue that comes up. So let's go through another vignette on virtual services. Karen has a comprehensive training in financial disciplines and is an AFC working as an independent contractor for the military and providing financial services. Since the pandemic, she's been doing virtual advising via Zoom in her home office. Toward the end of a full day of seeing clients, she starts to zone out during her evening sessions a bit more. The last client also left the last session feeling a little confused about her explanation of exactly what the TSP government matching really meant and how it contributed to their overall plan. Karen feels it's okay since it's recorded and she can review the playback later before her next session with the clients and explain things better then. What ethical issues are we seeing here? So due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
Karen needs
Sounds
a nap.
like you have some more work-life balance. That's great, Christine. That idea of just have some self-reflection, be honest about what you need from yourself at that point.
Yeah. Knowing your personal
Thanks.
limit. I love that. It's not just this knowing your scope of practice or your expertise, knowing your personal limits.
All right, so thank you everybody for your contributions in that chat. So following the onset of COVID, we've had an increasing amount of our interactions, as we are today, with online and virtually in the virtual counseling space. This can result in video conference or AKA Zoom fatigue. So what is this fatigue and how does it impact us? Well, it is conceptualized by examining how we might interact with individuals normally, but because of the use of video conferencing, it has become more amplified and burdensome. Normally, when interacting with others, we're usually more distant, only reserving the consistent eye contact and close proximity for those we are in our most intimate relationships. However, we are now engaging with others in a similar virtual proximity all the time. Additionally, we have the added burden of processing nonverbal cues and interactions with more individuals while managing video software. Sometimes what might have been a clear nonverbal cue in real life, like a client looking away, no longer has the same context. And because we have constant feedback on how we present ourselves through self-view options, which I always have to turn off, we are continually adjusting and are evaluating ourselves. This combined with the lack of movement while giving presentations can increase our anxiety, fatigue, and overall burden, our overall burnout in our interactions as it's a burden. However, just as a little caveat, it is important to note that we as humans may be more adaptable to this than some studies had suggested at the beginning. Some studies suggest that we as people are not reporting the same levels of fatigues to televideo meetings as we once were. So we are adapting, it seems, on some level. However, this does not take away from the important conversation about self-care, confidentiality, and confusion you or your clients may feel. And no matter how comfortable we become, there's potential for technical problems that can arise when we are engaging in any televideo service. All right. Why don't we go ahead and read this vignette about power dynamics? David recently lost his security clearance due to excessive credit card debt. His wages were garnished, and he was ordered to participate in financial counseling. David has been reluctant to provide his financial information to the counselor and has delayed many of his appointments. What appointments he does keep, he takes much of the time expressing that financial counseling is useless and isn't going to help him with his financial problems. You are his financial counselor. In your last session, David asked you to complete a financial counseling form as part of his plan of action. But you refused as he failed to participate in the counseling. Later, David's superior officer contacts you about David's counseling form, as he needs David to have his security clearance for an upcoming assignment. When you explain the situation, the officer states that he will talk to David about participating in financial counseling, but asks you to complete the form for the assignment as a favor and offers a bottle of high-end bourbon as a thank you. So how should the financial or counselor respond to this request from David's superior officer? What type of potential ethical and legal risks are present? Looking at the chat, I'm seeing a lot of here that hopefully there's some hyperbole here with, sure, taking some bribes. I think in the spirit of recognizing that bribes should not be good and kindly refusing his gifts. And let's just be honest and decline. I think that's a more straightforward answer.
Yes. And just like, even if you're like Nancy and you don't like bourbon, so it's not going to work for that. It's still, there are still other ethical issues there. It could be any form of bourbon. I know there was a question on what kind of bourbon it was, but as a Kentucky boy, it doesn't really matter to me. But yes, wrong on many levels.
Yeah. I'm glad we're seeing the humor in this. So, but I think with the humor set aside and just recognizing this, I think we're all recognizing that the power dynamics exist in the financial counseling relationships simply due to the fact that you have a financial knowledge that your clients do not. This gives you a means to use that information in ways that might be unfair, but you have the capability with that knowledge to help or hinder. In this scenario, there are a lot of concerns with falsifying documents, taking bribes, and doing that under pressure. However, it becomes inappropriate to use your power when it causes harm or is primarily in your self-interest. Not to mention, what happens to the trust you have with this officer or client if it suddenly becomes known? What if that client shares it with others? Your credibility can be easily soured. And if you are confused, don't hesitate to seek out legal counsel or your supervisors. As a final thought to consider is that there will be opportunities to collaborate with others, individuals who want to see your clients succeed. An appropriate referrals, as was just previously mentioned, can hopefully help with some of your clients' reluctance or challenges with engaging in the therapeutic process or the counseling process for financial counseling.
Yes, and I also want to take a moment to also just even from the chat fully agree with what Steve Harris said in recommending a security audit of the officer for offering a potential bribe there. But while this scenario does seem extreme, this is also based off of actual real experience, not from me, but that others have reported. And part of that is that it's not displayed as a bribe. It's displayed as a gift. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to also review the official regulations on gifts. So although gifting can be a common occurrence between military members to build camaraderie or highlight a symbolic achievement during formal occasions like retirement or new rank designations or even a change of command, or informal occasions like birthdays or just gratitude, employees of and associated with the Office of the Secretary of War must follow strict ethical rules regarding gifts, where anything of monetary value is generally considered a gift and may not be accepted if it's offered because of the employee's official position or from a prohibited source, such as someone doing business with the Department of War. However, there are common exceptions, including modest refreshments, public discounts, items valued at $20 or less within annual limits, and gifts based on personal relationships that are given across the military. And although gifts such as premium bourbon may actually be commonly given, it's safer to present gifts if there is a gift giving from a group rather than any type of or from an individual, to make sure that we're avoiding any appearances of favoritism or stay within monetary limits, but obviously not for direct services. So additional rules restrict gifts between employees, particularly involving supervisors and subordinates. So with very, very limited exceptions for small or special occasion gifts. So gifts to travel, foreign government gifts, gifts to the department are all subject to specific legal requirements and approvals. And they often need advanced authorization. And so because these rules can also be complex and very situation dependent and require that approval, employees are encouraged to consult their ethics officials before accepting any gift. And if a gift is warranted, a thoughtful handwritten thank you note is always appropriate and stays within the guidelines. So another vignette, looking at the scope of confidence. Mary, a general medical officer, has come to your office with her husband, Garrett. Recently, Garrett lost his remote technical job, and they're struggling with the loss of his income. Mary has large loans from her undergraduate and medical schooling, and they do not have any savings. Garrett recently took out an auto title loan to help cover costs and help them afloat until he can find a new job. While you're in your office, the couple has difficulty focusing with frequent arguments. At one point, Mary yells out, "If you didn't spend so much money gambling online, we wouldn't be in this mess." You, as a financial counselor, believe that Garrett's gambling addiction is a result of unresolved trauma. Curious, you decide to explore Garrett's problem and direct the conversation to childhood issues. So how would you respond to the immediate situation? And what are some potential ethical, legal steps you might take in this situation? Way outside the scope for an AFC. Referrals. Yes, counseling to counselors, to therapeutic or mental health counselors. And I like, yes, a warm handover with our clinical counselor. And yes, so these are all great comments. And there's a few things that we do want to reiterate in the scope of competence for financial counselors here.
I know that many of you are like, we're all part of that field. Many of you are part of that field here, and you have this great passion for helping others. But even so, it is important to make sure that you have the necessary credentials or license to actually be supportive and helpful. Your own mental health experiences and journey are sure to give you empathy and care, but that isn't the same thing as expertise. As many of these points have been reported in the chat, that nothing is directly reportable per se. There might be some exceptions for security clearance for mandated. I think that somebody had mentioned in the chat. However, if there's assessed that the gambling goes beyond some issues such as fraud, there could be problems. You're also not an addiction counselor. You cannot diagnose, but as many of you stated, you can offer resources and referrals to help them seek out future help. Another thing here that I haven't seen so much in the chat is evaluate the loan that was mentioned in here, and see if it was a predatory loan. Especially with an auto title loan, it is illegal to go beyond the above 36%. So just keeping in mind when clients present something really large and dramatic, that there are other details that could fall through the cracks that you can help them with. And finally, it is important to consider ways that you can enhance and protect the financial readiness of clients without breaching confidentiality. All right. So thank you for that participation. We'll now go on to the next vignette on professional dynamics. Elton has been working under contract as a financial counselor with a military facility. He has been providing accurate legal, ethical, and financially sound advice to his clients. He learns later that Jack, another financial counselor at the site, has been speaking poorly about him to other military personnel. Jack has been describing Elton as uptight and rigid. Furthermore, Elton learns that some of Jack's counseling does not comply with regulatory or military standards. How should Elton proceed? We've got some great one here. Speak with leadership about the situation, using some peer mediation.
Yeah, love
That's
that
great,
one.
Will. Yeah.
Get supervisors involved.
Talk with them, getting some support from leadership. Absolutely. We want to highlight that there's two potential ethical dilemmas here. One is how you act as a professional, and the other is evaluating risks to clients. When you consider just the name calling and immature behavior, it is most likely best to directly address it with the individual and or through your organization, through supervisors or mediation. I think those are great suggestions. There is likely no need to file an ethics complaint about that portion of the vignette. The other area, which likely will need to be addressed, is financial counseling that does not align with regulatory or military standards. Find out now who you might report to for your various organizations. For instance, as part of the AFCPE Code of Ethics, you are to, quote, report any felony related to the practice of the profession or bring disrepute, to the profession or any lesser crimes which involves misrepresentation, fraud, extortion, misappropriation, or theft, or any conspiracy to commit such a crime to the AFCPE Executive Board. Adjunct to that, for those of you who are military personnel financial counselors, or PFC, your best resource for what and how to report should come directly from your PFC regional supervisor. This is directly from the FinRed Personal Financial Counselor Program Guide.
And so, yes, a lot of great comments still coming in, especially involving supervisors with this. All right. Now for our final vignette we have for you guys today. Henry is an E2 that just recently started a family and comes to Megan, an AFC, and working in the Army's financial readiness program on the installation. He's interested in how to better save and invest his money for his family. Henry tells Megan that he recently spoke to a financial advisor at a large financial company where most of their financial advisors are former military or in military families. Most have high credentials and are fiduciaries. And they have free services that they provide for active duty personnel. He thought that sounded like a great fit. The financial advisor there recommended whole life insurance policies with expensive premiums for both investment and life insurance benefits. When Henry stated that he wasn't sure he was interested and wanted some time to think, the financial advisor got upset with him and said, since he was the professional, Henry should listen. Henry is worried he did something wrong. So now he's coming to you, or coming to Megan, for advice. So what steps should Megan take at this point if you were Megan as an AFC? So inappropriate behaviors. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, I think the first thing you do is you inform the client he did nothing wrong. You help reassure him. Yeah.
Yes. Broker check is another great avenue to look into the financial advisor. Reassure Henry that it is his choice.
Discussing with your legal advisors.
And so we actually know this situation is not all that uncommon, unfortunately. Although there may not be enough evidence of anything directly unethical, technically speaking, that would warrant any type of full investigation in this situation as it's laid out right now. There are still several ethical considerations in moving forward with Henry. Megan, as the financial counselor, obviously must maintain professionality and avoid criticizing a specific financial advisor or company unless there is reasonable cause to believe the other is acting unethically. If there is reasonable cause, such as direct evidence of a lack of providing full disclosure of the material conflicts and comparison of alternative investments, then Megan would be bound to report the unethical action to the appropriate regulatory bodies. However, the primary duty of any AFC is to act in the best interest of the client. So instead, at least initially, she can educate Henry about the potential warning signs of high-pressure sales and the tactics or strategies involved with those, and encourage him to take time to research options, compare the products, seek additional information, provide the education as needed. As a financial counselor, Megan should first and foremost reassure Henry that he did nothing wrong by asking questions or taking time to really consider any type of recommendation. It's essential that clients have the right to fully understand all the financial products and services being presented to them before making a decision, and all ethical financial professionals should respect that process. In doing so, it's also going to uphold the trust and integrity of our discipline, not just to Henry, but to the community at large. Megan should help normalize Henry's concern and explain that it is responsible to evaluate options carefully. For following the standards that are set by AFCPE, Megan should then provide objective financial education rather than endorsing any specific product or company, obviously. She can explain differences between term life insurance, whole life insurance, including how each works, typical cost, how life insurance fits into a broader financial plan for a young family, and the differences between insurance and investments. She should also conduct then a basic assessment of Henry's financial situation, and going through this process and understanding Henry's overall financial picture, Megan can then help determine appropriate priorities that might be more in alignment with what his goals and his plan is. And yes, as Jenny pointed out, this exact scenario was the basis for the creation of the MQFB designation.
That's great. Oh, we really have appreciated all the feedback that you've provided during this training. We recognize that there are financial counselors all across the nation here today, experts in particular state and organization. We believe you have so much to offer. So we hope to draw from you any other additional steps you or your organization are taking to adapt and support your clients. So go ahead and share any other additional insights, steps, or procedures that you do to help your clients. We want to hear from you.
Just give them space. I love that.
I love, oh, it's great that you're following up.
Participating in continuous education. Yep, absolutely.
I love that. A statement of understanding. So that way it helps them know what they're getting into. Bailey, promoting self-determined choice. What a wonderful insight. Let them give them the information and let them decide. And listening. Well, I think the chat is slowing down a little bit, but feel free to keep posting your comments about what you're doing to help your clients. Thank you all for contributing. It might sound cliche, but we can accomplish so much more when we draw upon the knowledge and expertise of the group over the individual. We hope that you take the same spirit of care and professionalism back to your work. I think, too, it would be beneficial to take what you learn about ethics here today to support your professional peers.
Because we know it can be difficult to do work if you're cut off from others. So connection really can help others along with yourself when making an ethical decision, because having a peer or having supervisors who really care about us and our work can help us stay true, not only to the discipline, but to ourselves. And because it's a tragedy when professionals really do veer away from appropriate behavior.
So hopefully for most of you, the vignettes we've covered were a reminder of the kind of standards you already are striving to keep. But as Bruce mentioned before, tragically, this is not always the case. I want to introduce to you, if you were not already aware, the story about Kaz L. Craffey. The United States Attorney's Office reported that from 2017 to 2023, Craffey, a civilian employee of the U.S. Army and a major in the U.S. Army Reserve, worked as a financial counselor in the Army Survivor Outreach Services. His responsibility was to counsel Gold Star families. For those who are unaware, a Gold Star family is a surviving beneficiary of a member of the armed services who died on active duty. Caffey, who, quote, was prohibited from offering personal opinions regarding the surviving beneficiary benefits decisions, had directed families to invest with two separate financial investment firms that he had been maintaining outside of the Army. It gets worse. He misled families, acting in such a way as to have them believe he had the Army's authorization and was working in their behalf. So what happened next? Well, the report goes on and states that he often did unauthorized trades, earning high commissions and losing more than $3.7 million. I hope that we can all agree that what Craffey did was appalling. He was in a position of power and prestige, but instead of helping grieving and vulnerable families, he preyed upon them, enriching himself. So not only do those families now have to try and manage their grief and financial situation, now they've spent years trying to seek justice. Furthermore, his actions not only impacted himself, but all of you as financial counselors, as well as the military, with his severe breach of trust.
Absolutely. And while I think we're all agreement in the within the comments section about just the terribleness, the horribleness, the greed that was displayed in this case, it shows that these cases are possible, that they can happen, and they do happen. And so while some things are obvious of, yeah, that's an ethical violation, we have these standards that we have to maintain, not just for ourselves, but all those that we are working with as well. So one key takeaway we're hoping you leave with today is the importance of having a clear ethical decision-making framework to help guide actions whenever you believe there may be unethical behavior, whether from yourself or witness from other providers. As we discussed, financial counselors, educators, advocates working with military populations often operate in very complex environments, very stressful environments that require careful judgment and clear accountability. So having a structured process ensures that decisions remain client-centered and professionally defensible. So this ethical decision framework rests on three core principles of protection, professional judgment, and documentation. Protection involves safeguarding both your clients and yourself while continuing to provide high-quality service. Counselors can support this goal by using clear, consistent messaging, defining their professional role early and often, and they must also recognize when a situation requires escalation to superiors, supervisors, or even the AFCPE or other accrediting bodies, and when to refer to other professionals. Maintaining these boundaries helps ensure that clients receive appropriate support while counselors remain within the scope of their professional responsibilities. Professional judgment is strengthened by following a thoughtful ethical documentation process. Effective documentation begins with identifying the known facts of the situation and distinguishing them from just assumptions or interpretations. Counselors should identify all parties who may be affected by the situation and reference the relevant AFC standards of practice and codes of ethics, as well as the military code of ethics. consulting with a professional support network, such as with Military OneSource, the Office of Financial Readiness, for instance, can also provide valuable perspectives. After evaluating available options, potential risks, and anything else that may be relevant to the case, the counselor should select the most defensible course of action. Clearly articulate the rationale behind that decision. I want to go back, and I like Caleb's of imagine you're in court. His idea of imagine you're in court and you're defending your position. Documentation should then capture the decision-making process, the actions that were taken, and any planned follow-up steps. Documentation, as you all know, is particularly important in military settings. So any military financial counselor that's operating environments where audits and oversights are common, professional roles can become misunderstood. Clients' disputes are going to happen. We need to document. And that documentation may be reviewed in legal or administrative proceedings. So we need to have clear, thorough records that not only support ethical practice, but also help protect both the counselor and the client by demonstrating that decisions were grounded in professional standards.
Thanks, Bruce. Something else as we're getting close to wrap up today is that is to always look forward and look out for any kind of future things that are updates to legal and ethical standards, both at the federal and state level. And so here are a few examples of things to just keep in mind as potential areas in the future horizon. In 2024, a report by the U.S. Treasury listed one of their top tier agenda items was to promote consistent and robust standards for uses of AI in the financial service sector. As we've discussed earlier, AI usage is resulting in ever-evolving landscapes of new regulations and standards. For instance, New York just introduced an act that requires companies the use of that use algorithms to have a clear pricing to display any disclosures notifying consumers that their prices were set using their personal data. Military regulations are also changing. The Department of War will be requiring many contracts to be in alignment with cybersecurity maturity model certification. Over the next 3 years, this legislation will be implemented. It is seen as strengthening national security through stronger cyber hygiene. And finally, a bill that has been proposed but is still in committee at this time is HR 7966. This bill would address that financial counselors are independent and do not have a conflict of interest with services they provide. These are just 3 examples of ongoing and potential legislation and regulation that can directly impact you. By no means is this a full list of what potentially is coming down the pipeline, but I think the important thing here is to be vigilant and proactive about how you integrate technology and looking out for future legislation.
And so as we wrap up today, again, we want to thank everyone in their chat and for your participation and for joining us today. But we really do also want to acknowledge that, again, you guys are the experts here. You're the ones going in, doing this day in and day out. So in the chat pod, what's one thing you can do to integrate more ethical work into your work with military personnel and their families? Please share your insights with everyone else.
Let's see, just staying up to date and being more aware, being mindful and of those emails and phone calls that come in quickly. Keep learning, validate AI, stay objective. Absolutely. Just be knowledgeable, be responsible. with your education, with AI usage. And really great comments.
Yeah, so much amazing feedback. We really, really appreciate all of the insights you've all shared with us today. And so there's some references that you'll be able to find, some of the resources, and some of the information that we have shared with you all today. But we want to thank you all for your time and your participation. And we'll hand it back over to OneOp.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Dr. Ross.
Thank you.
And thank you, Caleb. And thanks to everyone for joining us in all of the wonderful engagement in the chat pod. We're going to shift now to sharing resources and, of course, our continuing education information. I'd like to make you all aware of the War Department's online resources available for personal financial managers and counselors from the FinRed and Milspouse Money Mission websites. They have a wonderful e-newsletter and social media. You can access the financial well-being assessment, conversation cards, media kits, spending plan worksheets, the net worth tracker, and so much more. Providers can also check out FinRed on social media. They have a lot of great resources that you can reshare on your installation social media pages. Our current session is approved for 2 ethics continuing education credits from the organizations listed on this slide. We will drop a direct link to the webinar evaluation in the chat. You can also access the survey by navigating to the event page and clicking on the purple continuing education button. If you've had the event page open, you may need to refresh your browser for that purple continuing education button to appear. While completing the webinar evaluation, we would sincerely appreciate specific suggestions for future webinar topics that could be used directly in your work with service members. You'll note a few open-ended questions that you can provide feedback on the webinar format and how you plan to use the information shared today in your work. At the end of the evaluation, you will choose the correct link for your accreditation. And you will also be directed to a post-test, which you must pass with 80% or higher in order to receive a certificate of completion by email. Please be sure to click all the way through to the end on that Qualtrics survey in order to receive your certificate. If you are new to OneOp or looking for a starting point, we want to introduce you to our Powerful Provider Initiative. It's a curated collection of programming that covers the topics and priority areas most relevant to family service providers. Things like financial readiness, of course, food security, ethics of care, and military spouse employment. It's designed to meet you where you are, whether you're just getting started or adding to years of experience. And learn how you can support military couples through employment and financial transitions. This is an on-demand webinar, which is available in OneOp's Learning Library. And then throughout August of 2026, OneOp will host a 4-week professional development learning series to help service providers strengthen their capacity to support military families by enhancing community infrastructure and partnerships. Communities can best support military families when they are collectively competent. That is, when infrastructure and resources are intentionally designed with military families in mind. This series builds the knowledge and skills needed for providers to collaborate across systems, leverage resources, and implement sustainable community-based solutions. A link for the Academy mailing list has just been shared in the chat pod. We also want to tell you about another way to engage with OneOp content, and that's through Practicing Connection, our podcast hosted by Jessica Beckendorf and Aaron Carlson Rivera. Each episode explores personal and collective practices that help providers build resilience, strengthen collaboration, and show up more effectively for the families they serve. Episodes are short, practical, and available wherever you are. You can find Practicing Connection at oneop.org/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.